In this video, we are going to address two terms from the textbook, mala prohibita and mala in se. We will explain these terms, give a couple of examples, and also address some important ideas related to these terms that are not in the textbook. So first, mala in se. These are crimes that are wrong in and of themselves, meaning these crimes are wrong simply because of their nature. The nature of the crime itself makes it bad, makes it evil. These crimes are naturally wrong. Because they're naturally wrong, because the very nature of these crimes make them wrong, we can for the most part agree that these crimes are wrong. There's really not much debate. These are more extreme crimes, more offensive crimes, crimes that may even offend our morality, such as murder. There's really little, if any, debate about murder. We can agree that murder, the very act of murder, its nature is wrong. And this is what makes mala in se unique. The act of the crime itself makes it wrong. Likewise, burglary, another very common example for mala in se. The simple act of burglary is what makes it wrong. It's not really up for interpretation. It's naturally wrong. Because mala in se crimes are naturally wrong, or wrong in and of themselves, widely agreed upon, these crimes typically have much harsher punishments, especially compared to our next category, mala prohibita. These are crimes that are wrong because they are prohibited. They're crimes not because they are naturally bad, they're crimes because we have made them crimes. They're crimes because we say they are wrong. Think of when you're a child, and your mom says, "No, don't do that, that's bad." And you ask, "Why is it bad? Why can't you do that?" And the response is, "Because I said so." That's mala prohibita. Mala prohibita are crimes that are bad, they're wrong, because we've said they are. These crimes are less obvious. They don't exist in nature. They're crimes that are socially constructed, crimes that we have made. For example, running a red light. Running a red light isn't naturally wrong. There's nothing in nature that says, don't run a red light. But rather, this is a crime that we have created as a society. That we have said that, you know what, this is important, let's make this a crime. Or, public intoxication. You can argue that public intoxication isn't naturally wrong, but rather, we as a society have said, you know, this can be a little harmful, maybe a little pestering, so let's make this illegal. Keep in mind again the key difference between mala in se and mala prohibita. Mala in se is naturally wrong. The act itself makes it wrong. While mala prohibita is wrong simply because we as a society have said it's wrong. Most crimes fit under mala prohibita. Most crimes are essentially man-made. This is why every city, every district, every state can have slightly different regulations, slightly different laws. This also leads to some confusion, because what crimes fit under mala prohibita versus not being a crime at all can change. It can change based on where you live. Different cities have different crimes that fit mala prohibita. Or it can change based on when you live. That perhaps a crime was a crime 20 years ago, but is not anymore. If the designation of a crime can change from being a crime to not being a crime, then it's going to be mala prohibita. Unlike mala in se. Mala in se is much more serious, naturally bad, so it doesn't shift back and forth. It's wrong and will stay that way. It doesn't shift. Now, a couple related ideas. Some argue that these terms, mala in se and mala prohibita, are artifacts of common law, the legal system that we somewhat borrowed from the English and still draw upon today, but don't as heavily rely on. Some even go as far as saying it's not just an artifact, it is outdated. While the terms are still used today, the usage and importance has changed. Claiming they're outdated may be a strong statement. Better would be to simply say that they've changed. That the way we view mala prohibita and mala in se has shifted with time. For example, it used to be that because mala in se was naturally bad and taken more seriously, that the punishments for mala in se were much more severe, oftentimes death. But with mala prohibita, because they were man-made laws, we didn't treat them as harshly. You might perhaps get a fine. This may not be the case today. Can you think of some examples in which crimes that fit mala and se are not severely punished, may even be punished less severely than crimes that are mala prohibita? Or can you think of crimes that are mala prohibita, that although they are man-made, although they're bad because we say they're bad, still get treated harsher than crimes that are mala and se? I can think of a few examples, but I want you to think of your own. Brainstorm and think of are these terms as strong as they used to be? Are there examples in which we treat mala prohibita more severely than mala and se, and vice versa? Another idea that is important but not addressed quite yet in your textbook is the issue of classification. That the classification can be debatable. We may not all agree on how crimes should be classified. That for some folks a crime may be mala and se, but for other folks it may be mala prohibita. Most mala and se is pretty clear-cut, such as robbery, murder, but there may be some gray zones. For example, drug use. Many would argue that drug use is mala and se. The very nature of drug use, the effect it can have on you and society, is naturally bad, and so it is wrong in and of itself, mala and se. Others actually argue that drug use is not that big of a deal, and there's a wide movement to legalize some drugs or even all drugs. Those individuals argue that it's mala prohibita, that it's not naturally bad, but simply bad because we claim it's bad, because we made it bad. Consider the view of marijuana usage in the US. In the late 60s, the vast majority of Americans believed that marijuana should remain illegal. At that time, there was likely a strong argument that marijuana usage was mala and se, that it was naturally bad. However, more recently, the perspective of drug use, in particular marijuana use, has changed dramatically. By some estimates, over 50% of Americans favor legalizing marijuana to some extent. With that being the case, we could say that drug use perhaps, and in particular marijuana use, is mala prohibita. Again, the classification is a bit of a gray zone here. While some crimes, such as murder, are very clear-cut mala and se, other crimes, marijuana use, we may disagree on. We may disagree on based on our political affiliation, our religious beliefs, or even the time we live in, today versus the 50s and 40s. Now, oftentimes on your learning activities or discussions, you may be asked to give examples. One thing to keep in mind with examples is defend your example. So, for example, if I ask for an example of mala prohibita or mala and se, you can use drug use for either one, so long as you explain it. Drug use can be mala prohibita if you, in detail, tell me why. Drug use can be mala and se if you explain to me why. I hope this video has been helpful. If you have any further questions, please feel free to send me a message on Blackboard. We can communicate through the discussion board on Blackboard as well. And of course, you can also email me or give me a call. Have a great day.